She didn't say goodbye, because goodbye meant closure, and nothing about this night felt closed. The air outside the library was thick with December stillness, the kind that made breath curl in the dark like smoke from something burning inside. Lena, just 17, stood under a flickering street lamp with her arms wrapped around the only warmth she had left in the world, a newborn baby swaddled in a faded yellow blanket that smelled like her childhood home, the one she was kicked out of 7 months ago. She didn't name him out loud. She'd only ever whispered it in the dead of night, when no one could hear her say Eli, like it was both a prayer and a punishment. She had walked for almost an hour to get here. Every step had been heavier than the last, as if the guilt was anchoring her soles to the pavement. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her shoes were soaked from a gutter splash. Her coat, borrowed from a shelter bin, hung loosely on her thin frame. But she wasn't cold. Not in the way that mattered. Her arms were warm because he was in them. The baby who had cooed just hours ago while she tried to sing lullabies she half remembered from when she herself was a child. The baby who looked at her, without knowing the shame sewn into her name. She had tried to make it work. She really had. She'd begged the baby's father, who ghosted her when she told him. She'd pleaded with her older brother, who slammed the door in her face, and she'd even gone back to the school counselor, who had handed her a pamphlet and nothing else. The only person who had held her hand was a stranger at a bus stop last week, a woman who simply said, "You're braver than you think," before vanishing into the crowd. But tonight, there was no one. Just Lena. And the library. The old building loomed like a chapel, its bricks worn, its sign faintly illuminated by a broken floodlight. She waited until the final staff member locked the front doors and walked away under the street's yellow glow. Then she crept around to the emergency exit, the one she'd seen propped open before by late-night janitors who smoked during breaks. Tonight it was cracked open again, as if the universe had given her one final out. She slipped inside, carrying the baby close, silent as a ghost. The library smelled of dust and old paper, warm and dry, like a memory of something safer. She made her way past rows of books, past encyclopedias no one opened anymore, past the children's corner with stuffed animals and faded rugs. Her footsteps were barely whispers. She stopped in front of the checkout desk and knelt, unwrapping the baby just enough to press her lips to his forehead one last time. Her tears fell freely now, dripping onto his blanket like raindrops on stained glass. She placed a small folded note on his chest. Just one line, "His name is Eli. Please love him." She hesitated, her hands frozen on the blanket, as if part of her body refused to let go. Her whole soul screamed inside. "Please, someone love him," she mouthed without sound. She stood, turned, and forced herself to walk away. She didn't look back. If she did, she knew she'd run to him, scoop him up, and disappear into a life with no money, no shelter, no future. Her legs barely moved as she exited the same door and vanished into the frozen night. 10 minutes later, a part-time librarian named Marcia came back to retrieve a forgotten purse and heard a soft sound, like the whimper of a story that hadn't been told. Her heart sank as she spotted the small bundle. Her hands trembled as she picked him up. The baby blinked at her, lips forming a perfect O, innocent to the wreckage that had led to his being there. She called the police. The baby was taken to child services. The next morning, local news reported a library miracle, and volunteers flooded the foster office. No one mentioned Lena. No one knew her name. She had walked back into the dark, blending with the streets that had long ago forgotten her. But that night, under a crumpled shelter blanket in a church basement, she held her chest and whispered, "I left my heart in the quietest place I knew." And somewhere across town, Eli, safe, swaddled and unaware, dreamed of a voice he hadn't learned to miss yet. If one line hit you hard, imagine what's next. Like, comment your favorite moment, and subscribe so you never miss a heartbeat. It had been 20 years since Lena last stepped foot in Brookside, but the second her boots hit the cracked pavement of Maple Street, the ache in her chest bloomed like a reopened wound. The town hadn't changed much, the same rusting traffic lights, the same chipped mural on the side of Dee's diner, and the same suffocating quiet after dusk. Her coat was heavier now, her steps slower, but inside, she still felt 17, brittle, bruised, and silently screaming. She had built a life far away, stitched together by guilt and silence. Never married. No children. Just long shifts at a nursing home, a one-bedroom apartment with pale walls, and an unopened box under her bed marked E. She never opened it. Not once. Not until last week, when she received the letter. No return address.
No signature.
Just a sentence scrawled in crooked handwriting on rough beige paper. I think I'm your son. Her hands had trembled so hard she could barely finish reading. He said he didn't want anything.
No answers. No apologies.
Just a chance to give her something. Closure. The letter had a place and time. Brookside Public Library. 7 p.m. Thursday. She arrived an hour early, too afraid she'd talk herself out of it. Sitting on the same bench she had collapsed on 20 years ago, she held that yellow flannel baby blanket like a relic from a forgotten war. She had never been able to throw it away. Her fingers found the frayed corners, smoothing the same crease she once tucked under his chin. Memories attacked her, not in sequence but in fragments. His impossibly tiny fingernails, the way his body felt too warm against the cold library floor, the crushing moment she had to pull her hand away from his. She looked up at the library doors, her heart pounding louder than the winter wind. And then, as if pulled by some invisible thread, the doors opened, and there he was.
A tall young man stepped into the light, and she knew.
Before he spoke. Before he even looked at her. She knew. Same eyes. Hazel green with a flicker of gold. Same nervous shift in his stance, like he never quite knew how to belong in a room. Her breath hitched. He was beautiful. Not because of his face, though he had her cheekbones and someone else's strong jaw, but because he was alive. Whole.
Real.
He held a letter in his hand.
A real one this time.
Sealed with red wax. And as he crossed the courtyard toward her, his smile was soft but unreadable, the kind of smile people wear when they've spent their entire lives chasing ghosts. He stopped just a few feet away. Didn't speak. Just held the letter out toward her. It's not for you, he said gently.
It's from, to the baby you left behind.
Her throat closed up. She reached for it with shaking hands, but he didn't let go immediately. He looked into her, not through her. I want you to read it, out loud. And that was the moment Lena realized. This wasn't going to be a reunion. It was going to be something else entirely.
Something, messieurs.
More human. More honest. Every second counts. Like if it hit.
Comment if you cooked the clue?
Subscribe, if you're ready for more. Lena didn't speak first. She couldn't. Her throat tightened at the sight of him, her breath shallow and hands trembling as she clutched the folded baby blanket tighter to her chest like armor. Elias stood still a few feet away, shoulders stiff, arms crossed, the silence between them not just uncomfortable, but ancient. You waited. He finally said, his voice calm but cool, practiced, as though he'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times and stripped it of emotion. You came, Lena whispered back, barely audible, every syllable heavy with 20 years of guilt and grief. She stood slowly, the bench creaking beneath her, and for a moment they stared, not as mother and son, but as two people shaped by the same absence. He noticed the blanket in her hands, eyes narrowing. You kept that. His voice cracked, not from sentiment, but confusion, almost suspicion. Lena nodded, eyes brimming. I didn't keep much else of myself, but I kept this. He hesitated before stepping closer, slowly, like approaching a ghost. Why? It was more accusation than question. Because, she began, voice breaking, no matter how much shame drowned me, no matter what I told myself, you were still my child. My child I left behind in a library wrapped in this. Her words came out fast, as if they'd waited 2 decades in her ribs. Elias turned away momentarily, jaw tight. I read your name in the file, he said, voice low. I've known for a while. I thought writing the letter would be enough. But then, he trailed off, his voice getting swallowed by the winter wind. But then I needed to see if you were real. Or just another story. Lena stepped forward now, instinctively, tears finally falling. I was real, Elias. I just wasn't whole. I was 17. My mother kicked me out. I slept in bus stations, ate nothing for days, and when I gave birth, I had nothing. I chose that library because I thought someone would find you there. Because I couldn't bring myself to leave you in the dark. Elias didn't speak for a long while. He looked at her face, for similarities, for lies, for something he could hold on to. And then quietly, I used to sit in that library as a kid, not knowing I had once been left there. The irony hung painfully between them. Every birthday, I wondered if you thought of me, he added, his voice softer. I did, she replied, everyone. But I didn't think I deserved to see you grow. I thought you'd be better off. He sighed, rubbed his face with a gloved hand, eyes still unreadable. I don't know what I'm supposed to feel right now. Lena nodded, shoulders sinking. You don't have to feel anything for me. I didn't come to ask for forgiveness. I came to answer the question you asked in your letter, why? He swallowed, blinking rapidly, then looked down at the blanket in her hands, that small symbol of their broken but undeniable bond. I don't know if this makes anything better, he said. But I guess it makes sense. A flicker of something, not forgiveness, but understanding, passed between them. Would you sit with me? He asked suddenly, motioning toward the bench. You don't owe me anything, she said, caught off guard. Maybe not, Elias replied, but maybe I owe myself a beginning. Lena watched Elias walk beside her, the silence between them less hostile now but still thick with unsaid things. She couldn't stop glancing sideways, searching his face for signs of the baby she had once held, the one she'd wrapped in that pale blue blanket, whose tiny fists once clutched the air like he was begging not to be let go. She wanted to reach out, to say anything, everything, but her voice was a bird trapped in a glass cage. He finally broke the silence, speaking not to her but into the space between them. I was 5 when I realized my last name wasn't real. They changed it at the shelter. Lena's heart thudded. They told me I was found between the encyclopedias and the emergency exit. I still hate libraries. His words stabbed through her, deeper than anything she'd prepared for. They stopped walking. The icy wind bit through Lena's coat, but she didn't shiver. She just stared at him. I thought they'd find you a home, she whispered, barely audible. Elias laughed bitterly, not cruel, just tired. They found me places. Not homes. That's different. And then quieter, I never had a real home. His words cracked something in her. Her knees gave out, but she caught herself against a lamppost, fingers white from gripping the cold metal. I was 17, Elias. I didn't even have a bed. I slept on floors in people's basements. I didn't know how to keep you safe, but I couldn't take you into that kind of life. I thought the library would be warm, safe, public. Someone would find you. He looked at her for the first time in full, not just at her, but into her, eyes scanning her face like he was trying to read a language he once knew. Did you come back? He asked, and her heart stopped. Did you ever come back for me? A tear slipped down her cheek as she nodded. Every year. Same day. Same bench across the street. Until I couldn't anymore. I thought you'd hate me. I thought I didn't deserve to see you. Elias's jaw clenched, his eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to wash away the years of questions all at once. You looked at me like I was a stranger. Her voice was raw. You are, he replied, but softer than she expected. But maybe not forever. They sat again on that same bench as before, this time closer, the blanket still between them, like a thread neither dared touch but neither wanted to break. They told me I was abandoned, he said after a long pause. But then I read your letter. Lena's breath hitched. You got it. He nodded. Last year. A social worker tracked me down. Said someone kept mailing it to every foster home I was placed in. Most never forwarded it. But this one did. I opened it under a streetlight. I still remember the first line, if this reaches you, I prayed for a miracle. Her lips trembled. She had rewritten that letter 27 times. You said my name was Elias, he added, quieter. That you named me after your grandfather. That you used to sing to me. She nodded. I sang you Edelweiss. You liked it when you were 3 weeks old. You'd stop crying. He closed his eyes for a second, then asked, will you sing it now? Her eyes widened, startled. Right now. He nodded. I think I remember the melody. Her voice shook as she began, soft, barely a whisper at first, but then it steadied, Edelweiss, Edelweiss, every morning you greet me. The wind seemed to quiet. A mother's voice, returning like a lullaby to a boy who never forgot the feeling, even if the memory had gone. When she stopped, his eyes were red, but he didn't look away. I don't know what happens next, he said. Neither do I, she replied. But you wrote me a letter, he whispered. That has to mean something. And then for the first time since the park meeting, he reached for the blanket, not to take it, but to hold one edge. Lena held the other. No apology could undo 20 years. But in the silence, they both held onto something small and warm and real, the beginning neither of them ever got, slowly unfolding beneath a gray winter sky. Lena didn't want the moment to end. She sat beside Elias in the cold as if she could freeze time, keep the drizzle suspended mid-air, the blanket between them like a fragile lifeline that neither dared to drop. The melody of Edelweiss still lingered faintly in the space between them like a ghost, like the ghost of the baby she once cradled and left behind, and now sat beside her, grown, breathing, hurting and unknowable. Elias hadn't said much since the song. He hadn't needed to. His tears, silent and slow, had told her everything, that he remembered the blanket, maybe the tune, maybe not as a song, but as a feeling. A memory not fully formed but carved somewhere into the fibers of his soul. They sat like that for minutes or hours, she couldn't tell, until Elias stood, folded the blanket carefully as if it were glass, and handed it back to her. "I should go," he said, voice low, hoarse. "Of course," Lena managed, afraid to say anything else, afraid to ask if he'd see her again. She didn't want to pressure him. Didn't want to rob him of any choice again. He turned without another word and walked toward the street. She watched him go, her hands wrapped around the soft, faded fabric that once wrapped his tiny body. She didn't cry until he was out of sight. The next days felt like being back at the edge of that library again, waiting, breath held, hoping something she'd lost would come back. He didn't call. Didn't show. But then on the fourth night, just as she was about to switch off the porch light, she saw an envelope tucked into the side of her mailbox. No postage. Just her name, Lena, in handwriting that felt oddly careful. Her heart stuttered. She opened it with trembling fingers right there under the dim porch bulb.
Inside, I'm not ready for a odeur.
But maybe I'm ready for coffee. And below it, a location, a time. Tomorrow.
10h30 du matin.
The corner cafe on Alder and 6th. She reread the note 100 times that night. When morning came, she arrived 15 minutes early and sat by the window, twisting the letter between her fingers. She hadn't had coffee in years.
Not real coffee. Not like this.
Not with hope. He walked in 5 minutes late, hoodie soaked from rain, backpack slung over one shoulder. He looked around, saw her, and came over wordlessly. Sat down. "You ordered?" he asked. She shook her head. Didn't want to get it wrong. He nodded, then got up and came back with 2 cups. "Black for me," he said.
Hazelnut latte for you.
Her eyes widened. "How did you, lucky guess," he said, but something in his tone told her he remembered. Maybe just the scent.
Maybe something else.
For an hour, they sipped, they talked. Awkward, stumbling talk at first. About neutral things. Weather. Books. Music. Then she asked softly, "Your mother, the one who raised you. What was she like?" His jaw tensed, but he didn't look away. Tough. Didn't have much love to give. But she tried. She wasn't supposed to have kids. Then suddenly, there I was. Already walking, barely talking, already mine. He paused. She didn't want to adopt. But she didn't want to give me up, either. She always said I fell into her life like a test. She passed, Lena whispered. Maybe, Elias said. Or maybe she just kept showing up. A silence stretched, but it was no longer sharp, no longer full of blame. Then she asked, "And your father?" His gaze darkened. "Don't know. No one ever told me. Not her, not the agency. Maybe that's better." Lena stared into her coffee. It was someone I shouldn't have trusted. I was stupid, 17, scared. When I found out, it was too late. He disappeared. I never saw him again. Never wanted to. Elias's lips pressed into a thin line. "So, you were alone." She nodded. Completely. Another silence. This one almost sacred. "Is that why you left me?" he asked. The words didn't strike her like a blade. They struck her like a weight finally lifted into air. "Yes," she said. "And because I didn't think I deserved you. Not then. Not with the life I had. Not when I was just a scared girl hiding in a school library every lunch break." Elias stared at her, eyes wet again, not blinking. Then slowly, He reached into his bag and pulled out a second envelope. This one thicker. Found this last week. In a box in her attic. He slid it toward her. Lena opened it with unsteady fingers. Inside were 6 old Polaroids. Each one a different stage of him as a baby, newborn, first steps, first tooth. Her heart cracked open. She kept these, she whispered. Elias nodded. And this was taped to the back of one. It was a card.
À librairie du date card.
The same kind they'd used 20 years ago. And scribbled on the back, in her own messy handwriting, I'm sorry.
Job someday you'll understand.
She gasped. I left that in the blanket pocket, she said. I forgot. I thought. She must have found it, Elias said. She saved it. She told me once that no mother who left a child like that did it because she didn't love him. That sometimes love means giving them away. Lena clutched the card to her chest. She told you that? Elias nodded. Yeah. When I was 10. I didn't get it then. I think I do now. And then for the first time, he smiled. Not fully. Not easily. But enough. Enough to make Lena's breath catch. Enough to know something had changed. I'm not saying I forgive you, he said. But I think I want to understand you. Lena reached across the table, laid her hand palm up. That's all I've ever hoped for. He looked at it. Looked at her. And slowly, he placed his hand in hers. Sarah sat alone in the dim glow of her kitchen, the letter still trembling in her hand, though she had already read it a dozen times. The words etched into the paper had shattered and reassembled her all at once. To the woman who left me but never stopped loving me. It wasn't anger in his letter.
Notre centme.
It was a mosaic of curiosity, understanding, and something Sarah never dared to dream of, forgiveness. He had written of the day he found out he was adopted, how his heart cracked open with confusion, and how the truth became a silent presence in his teenage years. He had always wondered, who was she? Why had she left him? And more than anything, had she ever thought of him after? The library, he wrote, had become a myth to him. A ghost story whispered by his adoptive parents who were kind but quiet about her. And now, as a young man in his 20s, he was ready to meet her, not to accuse, not to judge, but to understand. Sarah clutched the necklace that had once hung around her 17-year-old neck when she'd made the hardest choice of her life, the one that haunted her every night since. In her mind, she could still see the old library steps, the bundle in her arms, the kiss she placed on her son's tiny forehead. I named you Eli in my heart, she whispered. Even if I never got to tell you. The next morning, Sarah stood in front of her mirror, running a brush through her chestnut hair that had long since dulled with time. She looked at herself not as the broken 17-year-old from her memory, but as someone who might, just might, be allowed to heal. She dressed slowly, deliberately, a soft cream blouse tucked into a pair of pressed jeans, the necklace with a tiny silver locket hanging just over her heart. She stared at her own reflection like she was preparing to meet a ghost, except this ghost had grown into a man, carried her DNA, and maybe, just maybe, carried a piece of her love inside him. The letter had included a date, a time, and a location, the reading lounge of the same library. 20 years later, the universe was folding in on itself, bringing her back to the place where everything had been both lost and begun. She walked slowly toward the library, her heels tapping against the sidewalk like a heartbeat, the same sidewalk where she'd once run with tears blurring her eyes and an infant in her arms. Everything looked smaller now, quieter. The brick walls were more weathered. The steps didn't seem as steep. Yet the ache in her chest was just as fierce. The heavy wooden doors creaked open, and the smell of old books and dust wrapped around her like a memory. She moved through the aisles, each step a prayer. And then, there he was. Sitting on the very armchair she remembered collapsing into after leaving him 2 decades ago. Tall, dark curls like hers, head down as he flipped a page. He wore a forest green hoodie, sleeves pushed to his elbows, revealing slender forearms. She recognized the dimple in his chin, the curve of his ear. Her stomach turned over. This was him. His real name was Adam now, but in her soul, he had always been Eli. He looked up. Their eyes met. A strange calm settled over her, almost sacred. He smiled softly, uncertain but open. Hi, he said, standing up slowly. You're Sarah. She nodded, too choked to speak. Her voice had dissolved into the gravity of the moment. He stepped forward, held out his hand, then hesitated, and instead pulled her into a gentle hug. She melted into it, every second stretching like eternity. "I've waited my whole life to see your face," he whispered. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks, soaking the shoulder of his hoodie. "And I've waited every day just to say I'm sorry," she breathed against him. He pulled back and shook his head, eyes glistening. "You don't have to be sorry," he said. "You gave me life. That's more than enough." They sat across from each other, neither rushing. Time had already done its damage. Now, it could do its healing. He told her about his life, his adoptive parents, his childhood, the struggles of not knowing his origin, the private hope that someday someone would reach out. He told her about the dream he'd had as a boy of a woman with warm eyes singing a lullaby he didn't know but somehow remembered. Sarah smiled through her tears. "I used to sing to you," she said, "even when I knew I'd have to say goodbye." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, her letter. The one she had left with him as a baby, tucked under his blanket. She gasped. She had assumed it had been lost, thrown away. But he had kept it. "It's all I had of you," he said. And it was enough to keep wondering. As the library clock ticked softly above them, Sarah realized the years she had spent punishing herself were over. Not forgotten. Not erased. But finally, allowed to rest. They talked for hours. Laughed about shared quirks. Discovered how both hated olives, loved storms, and tapped their feet when nervous. Somewhere between the silence and the sentences, something unspoken began to mend. As evening rolled in, they stood outside the library together, the same spot where her past had once broken. She looked at him, silhouetted in the fading sunlight, and said, "Would it be all right if I started being your mother now?" He looked at her, not as the woman who had once left him, but as the one who had never really let go, and said, "I'd like that." They walked away from the library, not holding hands, not rushing anything, but walking together. Two people once separated by silence, now stitched together by truth. And as they disappeared down the street, the old library doors creaked shut behind them, not as a place of endings, but of beginnings that had taken 20 years to come home. Every second counts. Like if it hit.
Comment if you cooked the clue?
Subscribe, if you're ready for more.